Ready? So tonight's shir is dedicated for Refuah Shlema for Yafa Adina Bas Chayatova, a dear friend. So we'll have her in mind tonight as we go back to last week. Sorry, it's been a while, um, but I'm back for now at least. So let us pick up with the daf from last week. There are two topics I want to talk about tonight. First topic is the special mitzvah of ha'anaka, right? We've been dealing with avadim for, it feels like a month already, right? We spoke about them at length, if you remember, in the middle of Gittin, right? Around Lamed Ches to about Mem Hey or so, Mem Vav. We had a whole week over there. Now we have another week and a half about avadim Ivrim, avadim Kananim. So sandwiched in between the laws of an Eved Ivri is the special mitzvah of Hanaka. All right, so let's see what the Gemara says on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, about 15 lines from the top. We're going to do a little bit on Amud Aleph and then just a little bit on Amud Beis. And then we're going to do our deep dive to understand what this mitzvah is all about. Okay, so Tanu Rabbanan, Kama Ma'anikin Lo, right? We spoke about on Daf Tezayin. We happened to mention it in passing, but now that the Gemara mentioned this concept of Hanaka, which is giving the Eved presents when he leaves you. Now, the Gemara previously discussed that an Eved has to complete his 6-year sentence or go out in Yovel, right? It has to be that he left, right, on a good note. But avadim that leave on a bad note, right, do not get these presents. Okay, so that's one distinction that we have to understand. So what kind of presents do we give him? So the Gemara has a machlokes about how much we actually give him. We give him 5 selas worth from each item that the Torah, we're going to see the psukim in a second, but Rashi brings down that the Torah says he gets certain goodies. So one of the things in his goodie bag is the tzon. The pasuk is mitzoncha, umigaroncha, umiikvecha, from your threshing floor, from your sheep, and from your yekev, from your wine press. So $5 of each, tzon, goren, and yekev. Okay, that's according to Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda omer shloshim k'shloshim shalaved. Rabbi Yehuda says you get 30, not 5. You get 30, which corresponds to the damage that a owner has to pay if his shore kills an Eved. Okay? Rab Shimon Omer chamishim k'chamishin sheva erchin. So Rab Shimon says, no, not 30, 50. He has a higher amount because, we're not going to get into the exact limud, but the Gemara says that it is a number of 50 because that is the biggest number you will get to in the laws of Erechin. Again, Erechin is a person from the age 20 to 60, a male, that donates the value of his life to the Beis HaMikdash. So that concludes the machlokes about what we give him. Okay, so let's take this in steps. So the Gemara says there's a 3. Now, the rest of the Gemara on this Amud goes through the various sources, okay, why each Tana disagrees with the other Tana, and why one gave a small amount, why one gave a bigger amount. That's not really important for this discussion. But if you turn over the page to Yud Zayin Amud Beis, the Gemara makes a statement. The second line on 17b on top says Tanu Rabbanan, Asher berachacha Hashem Elokecha. Okay? You give what God granted you. Whatever God blessed you, then you give to the Eved. So the Gemara says, Yachol nisbarach bias biglolo manikin lo. Lo nisbarach bias biglo in manikin lo. So it sounds like, well, you will give your Eved a bonus, right? A send-off bonus, assuming you were successful, right? You were successful while he was your Eved. If you weren't successful and you lost all your money in the stock market, and this Eved brought you nothing but misery, then you could possibly argue, why in the world should I give him a penny? Right? He was a bad luck sign for me. So therefore, the Gemara goes out of its way to say, don't say that. That's not true. Talmud Lomar Hanek Tanek. You shall give him, you shall adorn him, Mikol Makom, in any situation, whether you prospered or whether you suffered. So if that's true, then why does the pasuk say you give as you are blessed with? It sounds like you got to give him anyway. So the Gemara says, Hakol lefi bracha tenlo. No, you have to give him a minimum. But as Rashi explains on the third wide line on the left, im nisbarach habayis bishvilo harbe tosef al hanako. No. It's like a minimum wage with a bonus. You will give him a minimum no matter what, whether you were prosperous or whether you were not prosperous. But the imlav al tifchos min hakasub. The minimum, let's according to Rav Meir, right? He was the first opinion. The minimum is $5 from each item. So you got to give him 15. That's the minimum. But if you had a banner 6-year bull run and you made tons and tons of money because your Eved was a good luck for you and he helped you and you partook in the fortune with him, then you should really give him a certain percentage of your total winnings. But in a bad market, you should never, ever give him less than what the Torah mandates. Okay, so that is the pasuk. So, or I should say, rather, that is the Gemara. So let's look for a second at the actual psukim. Okay, the pasuk starts off. Let me open it up. The pasuk is in Parshas Re'eh that we had a number of weeks ago. Let me just open up my Sefaria. Second. Okay. כי ימכר לך אחיך העברי או העברייה ועבדך 6 שנים, ובנה השביעית תשלחנו חופשי מעמך. Keep in mind, Re'eh and Parshas Mishpatim are very similar, right? They both talk about this concept of Eved Ivri. So 6 years you work. Pasuk 13 says, V'chi tishalchenu chavshi me'imach, lo tishalchenu reikam. Do not let him go empty-handed. Rather, hanek tanik lo, furnish him with mitzoncha from your tzon, migarncha, from your threshing floor, miyikvecha, and from your wine vat. Sheberacha Hashem Elokecha titen lo. Sounds good. Why? So this last pasuk is really the punchline of this mitzvah. Why do we care about giving our Eved a goodie bag to go home with? Because the pasuk says, "V'zacharta ki Eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim va'yiftecha Hashem Elokecha aken orchim etzecha hadavar zeh." Because you should remember, and this is one of the top 3 most often quoted psukim, or I should say repeated psukim, is remember that you are a slave, right? Dozens of times, Gemara and Bava Metzia in the 5th parak talks about ona'ah, right? It talks about ripping someone off, but the worst thing you could do is onas dvarim, is making fun of someone. And the Gemara gives an example of making fun of a ger. Because the Gemara says, look at how many times the Torah goes out of its way to say, do not oppress a ger, because guys, what do you think you were a couple hundred years ago? You were all gerim, right? So this is one of the many, many times that the prohibition of, or not the prohibition, but the concept of remembering that you were in Egypt. right? So therefore what? That's the big question. What is the connection between you should remember that you were in Egypt and God redeemed you? That's why I am telling you this law today. So the obvious connection is, well, hold on a second. We were slaves, and what happened to us? We also left with goodie bags. Now, what goodie bags did we leave with? So if you look in Rashi, Rashi in the Chumash says something very simple. He says, "V'zacharta ki eved ha'isa." Rashi says, "Ve'enakti v'shaniti lecha mibizas Mitzrayim ubizas hayam." Right? I loaded you up with, well, for the first time with good things, and then the second time I loaded you up even more when it came to the spoils, right, that you got from the Yam Suf. Afata hanek ushnelo. Therefore, you should load him up, right, once and do it again. Okay, so we are commanded to load up this Eved as he goes home because of what happened to us. The two other commentaries, one in Parshas Bo. Parshas Bo is Rabbeinu Bechaya. The pasuk says, the pasuk says in Perik Yud Aleph, right after Makas Bechoros, and the handwriting is on the wall that Paro was going to let the Jews out. The pasuk says, "Vayishalu ish me'es re'ehu." Right, everybody borrowed, quote unquote, kalim from the Egyptians. Says Rabbeinu Bechaya, "Ein she'ela zu she'ela hamurim bekalim shehi she'ela almanas lahachzir." He says it's funny because when the Torah uses the word like by a shoel is one of the shomer, someone who borrows, right? If I go and I say, "Can I borrow your lawnmower?" then you don't actually own the lawnmower. Your intent is to pay it back, right? You're borrowing it for an hour and then you're going to give it back. So this is not a classic case of the Jews borrowing the pottery from the Egyptians. They asked, because it's funny, the word shoel means to borrow, it also means to ask. And because we have such a beautiful, rich language, there's obviously a connection between the word borrow and ask, right? They're very related. So to Hebrew, they're very close. One of them means you have to return. The other meaning is, well, can I ask you to have them without returning them? I.e., a gift, a matana. And the Rabbeinu Bechaya says, "V'Kadosh Baruch Hu yiten lahem chen be'enim hamitzrim v'yitnu lahem," and God gave grace in the Egyptians, and they said, "Sure, take all of our stuff." Ve'ein ze gnevas das sheyitzava b'Hakadosh Baruch Hu chas v'shalom. And the Rabbeinu Bechaya says, I mean, this sounds like gnevas das, like, oh yeah, can we have this? Wink, wink, right? You know, in a couple of days, your country will cease to exist because half of them will drown in the Yam Suf. So this is not what we call Gnevas Das. This was permitted. Why was it permitted? All right, here's where the fun starts. The work that the Jews did it was priceless, to quote Master. Why was it priceless? Because because if you were up the amount of money, okay, a very, very controversial topic that I ain't touching with a 10-foot pole, that today they call reparations, but that's what the Rabbeinu Bechaya is referring to. He says that this was priceless, and therefore, because we worked, V'halo din Torah, says Rabbeinu Bechaya, ve'eved she'avad es adonav sheva shanim shu chayiv b'hanaka. After all, the pasuk says, "V'chi tishalchenu chavshim v'mach lo tishalchenu reikam." Right? You gotta give him stuff on the way out. And he ends off by saying, "Alachas kama v'kama hamitzrim shehaisa etzlam avodas Yisrael shel reish daled vav shanim." 210 years worth of back pay, says Rabbeinu Bechaya. Don't you think we should at least get something on the way out? Okay, so that's one opinion of the Rabbeinu Bechaya. I found another commentator which talks about, because it's funny, because this was a pasuk in Parshas Bo, If you remember, way back in the beginning of Parsha Shmos in the third parak, God already is foretelling that Moshe, you're going to go and you're going to go to Paro and he's going to give you a hard time. You're going to end up taking the people out. And by the way, you're not going to leave empty handed. And the Pasuk says in Parak Gimel, Pasuk Chaf Aleph in Parsha Shmos says, Lo Salchu Reikam. And the Orach Chaim says on that, Kan Ramas Hashem Mishpat Eved Ivri. God, this is the first time that God is referencing the law of an Eved Ivri, Dechsiv Lo Shochet Hanik Tanik Lo. So the very first time is the word rake. You're not going to leave empty-handed. So obviously the commentators are ripe in the beginning of Shmos, already connecting the dots that this concept of Hanukkah, that the Pasuk in Parshas Re'eh says that the point of these gifts are because you are slaves. So we already see a couple of references that, yes, we were slaves and therefore we are not leaving empty-handed. There is furthermore a chizkuni that does a little bit of the job of what the Sefer HaChinuch that we're going to eventually see, but the Sefer HaChinuch gives not just a historical reason, i.e. Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. The Chizkuni gives a practical reason that says the following. It says, Mitzarncha mikvecha migarncha mikvecha lechem yain ubasar shaharei b'machruhu bezin akasav medaber. Now, one thing we did not say in the Gemara, because it was actually before Daf Yud Zayin, says again that if you remember how the whole Evet Ivri sugya started, was that there are two types. One of them was sold by Bezdin because he couldn't pay back, and the other one he sold himself. So the Gemara makes several distinctions, several halachic distinctions between the two. And if you would remember from last week, you would know that this entire concept of Hanukkah is only by Bezdin selling the Evet, not by him selling himself, right? So if Bezdin sells someone, obviously this person had nothing. So ve'ein lo klum ki Bezdin shalmu demei mechiraso bignevaso, right? Because the court sold him because the guy didn't have a penny to his name. He couldn't repay the victim that he stole from. So now that this person is penniless and he's leaving you, the Chizkuni ends off by saying, right, seeing that he has nothing to his name, how could he ever start again with someone else in his life? Right? It's like leaving jail. You leave jail, you don't have a penny. Right? Remember Shawshank at the end? What was his name? Right? He left. He had to work in a grocery store, the old man. Right? He didn't have a penny to his name. So therefore, what's the therefore? So the therefore, how could you let someone go penniless? Right? If you want him to start again, and here's the key, not beginning to steal again and start this whole cycle again, therefore you have to provide him with the necessities. So it's an interesting, and we're going to see this concept in a second, I guess you would call it a forced tzedakah, right? And the Rambam actually says that we're going to get to that. So, and that actually is a good springboard because there's a lot of lumdus, as I like to say, on this concept. Is it sounds like from the Chizkuni and from the words of the Rambam, it's tzedakah, or is it an obligation? Meaning, we know the concept of obligations, right? A few weeks ago on Daf Yud Gimel, the expression from the Gemara is milva haksuva b'Torah. There are some financial obligations where you owe the money and it's actually viewed as a loan, meaning you have a baby that's born and the mother is not a Kohen or a Levi, she's a Yisrael, so therefore there's a 5 sla'im payment that has to be made to the Kohen. You sinned by accident, you have an obligation to bring a korban, and the Kohen gets to partake in it. you damage someone's ox, the Torah mandates there's a payment to be made. You said an erechin, right? You're 30 years old. You said an erechin. You have a bill. You have an IOU that gets mailed to your house, just like your shul dues get mailed every August. So your dues to the Beis Hamikdash of 50 shkolim are due. So that's what we call an obligation. So the question is, where does this Hanukkah fit in? Is it an obligation like that? Or is it tzedakah? Meaning, does it belong, as they would say in yeshiva, does it belong in Choshen Mishpat? That this is a due. This is like you're a love, you owe money to either to a financial institution, or you owe money to this Eved, or is it tzedakah? It goes in what we would call Yoredeya, right? Like we have halachas about tzedakah, and there are certain laws about tzedakah. Now, obviously, there are many nafkaminas. There are practical differences between them, right? One of them is the concept of forcing someone, right? Can you force someone to give tzedakah? So there's a Gemara, without getting into that whole topic, we broached this topic, I believe, in Ksuvas, right, where it says any time where the Torah gives a matan schara, right, where the Torah describes the reward, right? So Bezdin is allowed to go. Like if you pledge something in shul, Bezdin could come to your house next month and start seizing your property, believe it or not. It's hard to believe, but this is it's almost like the words of the Chizkuni that we said, that the guy's leaving empty-handed, we will force you to give him tzedakah, right? It's a very, very touchy subject. In fact, in the Shulchan Aruch, there's a shach in Choshen Mishpat that actually says, he says the following. I'll just say one line. He says, "Ela harambim mefarish ba'alma b'chol mili de tzedakah." You go in Meiser Sheni u'sha'ar tzedakah nami lo svir like Rav Nassan. So there's actually a concept of Rav Nassan about if A owes B and B owes C, then A owes C. Not AOC, we don't like her. AO's C, right? So we're going to say that there's a loan going on between two people. And if Ruvain owes Shimon and Shimon owes Levi, then Ruvain could go right through Shimon and pay Levi directly. But that's only if there's a loan of money. What if it's a tzedakah, right? So that's one of the differences. That's one of the nafkaminas, whether this is actually considered a tzedakah or an obligation. So that's one thing of interest. But the Shach ends off by saying, "Dehadavar yadua dehanakahu midin tzedakah." If you look in the psukim really, and the Rambam talks about this, really talk about this as this is a tzedakah. Now, it may be, as we said a few times, it may be a forced tzedakah. Even the Sma, the words of the Sma, I'm not going to go into it, but he really calls this a mandatory tzedakah, right? We're not used to that. Tzedakah, it's voluntary if you made a lot of money, if you're in a good mood, if you're in a fortuitous situation, that's one thing. But a forced tzedakah, that's, it's a little controversial. So, that's one thing, obviously, to think about when we're talking about this concept of Hanukkah. Now, what made this mitzvah famous are the words of the Sefer HaChinuch. Okay, the Sefer HaChinuch classifies this as, by the way, two mitzvahs in the Torah. Of course, if you look in the Psukim, the pasuk says, "Do not send him empty-handed, but rather you should send him with gifts, with goodies." So there's a lav and there's an aseh. All right, so let's look in mitzvah number 482. Okay, now the Sefer HaChinuch, right, usually, the reason why we like mentioning him in the beginning is because, very simple, he gives a reason that we all could understand. But he does more in 482 than just give a reason. It's a famous Sefer HaChinuch because he ends off with advice for us. But first, let's look at the reasons behind the mitzvah. Misharshe ha-mitzvah, the root of this mitzvah, Laman nikne ben afshenu midos ma'ulos yikaros v'chamudos. It's a good thing to give charity to people, right? We acquire for ourselves beautiful, beautiful midos. Great. Bima nefesh hayakar v'me'ula nizkel atov v'hel atov chavetz leitiv amo, right? And we'll be zoche, we'll merit, right? That Hashem wants to do good for his people, right? And it's our glory that we should have rachmanus on the people, right? V'hodenu v'hadarnu hu shenarachem al misha avad osanu v'niten lo mishalanu b'toras chesed, right? Again, the guy does a favor for you. Now, granted, he stole again, and this is all you have to keep in mind. How did he start in your house? He started in your house because he couldn't pay you back after stealing from you. So let's not make him a lamed vavnik right away. Okay, let's be more realistic. But the Torah says we're going to throw him a bone and we're going to give him gifts on the way out. We're going to have rachmanus on him. That's the key word over here, nerachem, right? Aside, which we have stipulated to give him for his salary. This is a very understandable, logical idea, and there's no reason to hack, as they say. The problem is, or not the problem is, but he ends off. Let me open it now. Did I not? I forgot to. You know what? I'm going to read it from here. So, how does the Sefer HaChinuch end off? He says it's Noheg, Zacharim, in the Kevos, and then he says at the end, Umikol Makom, Af Bizman Hazeh, Yishma Chacham B'Yosef Lekach. He says, even in today's times, now, when the Sefer HaChinuch wrote this, when was today's times? It was, I believe he was in the 12th century in Barcelona. So it was, I think, somewhere in the mid 1100s in Barcelona, just to give you an idea of when he's writing this, 950 or so years ago, right, in Spain. And he says, you should take good advice. She'im sachar echad b'bnei Yisrael. Forget the concept of an Eved Ivri for a minute. You hire a guy to mow your lawn, right? He's your gardener. Anyone who you do work with.
14th century.
14th? I'm sorry. I thought it was the 12th. Okay, I'm off. Sorry, I apologize. Okay, it's 725 years ago. Okay, still. Right? So you hired someone, va'avdu zman meruba, and he worked for you. Oh, afilu muat, or he worked
13th
for you.
13th century. I just looked it up, 13th century.
13th. Okay, the 1200s. All right, so I'm getting better. So I'm off by 100 years. Right? You hired someone for a decade, or you hired someone for a month. That's what the Chinuch says. It doesn't really matter. You should give the guy some kind of severance pay just to be a good guy. All right? Now, the Sefer Chinuch, I'm sure, had all the best intentions by saying this parting line. The problem is he opened up an entire can of worms by being the first person to put this concept of anaka together with severance pay. Because after he wrote this, probably not even 100 years later, lived the Maharam Rutenberg, or maybe lived around the same time, I'm guessing. In one of his tshuvas, he made this statement famous because he learned the Kal V'chomer from here. He said, hold on a second. The whole source of severance pay is from where? Is from an Eved Ivri. How did an Eved Ivri get to you? Through a sin. He stole, and not only did he steal, he had the chutzpah of not even be able to pay you back. That's how he ended up working for you. Now, yeah, he worked for you for a while, 6 years or until Yovel, and he loved you and he left at the end. But great, the bottom line is it started with a sin. So could you imagine if you hire someone who didn't steal from you, who actually came on his own volition and had the right and worked with you and things went well and he left one day for whatever reason, of course you should give him what we'll call severance pay. Okay? So because of that statement, it seems like this whole concept of severance took, became a hot topic. And I want to read to you, Shmuel may know this. There is by Michael Broide, a Dayan in the Bezalel of America, had a case about 20 years ago, okay, where he dealt with, I'm just going to read the facts of the case just for a second. The facts of the case, it's actually from an article in Traditions that I saw. The facts, it has to do, the plaintiff worked in a yeshiva. He was a Rebbe in a yeshiva for a number of years, and he was passed over, right, for another promotion, right? And he was making $40,000. Okay, this is exactly 20 years ago. On August 30th, just prior to the commencement of the plaintiff's final, after agreeing a number of months earlier to continue the work, the plaintiff resigned the position in the yeshiva. And the yeshiva, given the last minute resignation of the plaintiff, sought to persuade the plaintiff where they upped him by $4,800, right? In the last minute to a slightly better position so as to allow the plaintiff to claim that a promotion was given. But the Rebbe felt that the contact, he was upset and he wanted to resign, right? The yeshiva felt that it was unethical and told the plaintiff that the contract would not be renewed and severance would not be paid. Okay, so now we have people's court over here. We have a big case. So just a couple of interesting notes that I myself wasn't aware of. Apparently, in the land of Israel, they have what's called Chodesh Lashana. When you work for someone and you leave, the law of the land is they have to pay you 1/12 or 8.3% of your salary for the year. Okay, that's something I did not know until this. Obviously, in America, there is no standard. It's whatever you negotiate or whatever the company rules are. Right? Now, that sounds great. The problem is there are, in this case at least, some limitations. Because I'm reading over here, in the American severance practice, this custom, which is implicitly incorporated into every single employment contract for a Judaic studies teacher in the US. So basically, this is true for all the yeshivas in the US. It's limited by 5 manners. It applies only to Judaic studies, not to secular studies. Okay, that seems, I'll be honest with you, that seems unfair. Okay, it only applies to employees and not to people who work as independent contractors like tutors, Shabbaton directors. Okay. Third, the obligation to pay severance is limited to situations in which the teacher's contract is not renewed or the teacher is dismissed for another cause. If a teacher resigns, then he waives the right to severance. Okay. Which is also, debatable. Again, we're not going to go nuts on this, but just, it's interesting to hear, Fourth, yeshivot and teachers may contract around this custom if they so wish. A school and its faculty may explicitly agree upon their employment arrangement does not agree that their employment arrangement does not include severance. So they could, it's like masna masha kasum batorah, right? They could say, no, we don't want to do this. So that's the other thing. Okay, the fifth thing is there's a dispute as to whether part-time or untenured faculty are entitled to severance pay. Okay, so you see already that this is getting very complicated. So I guess we all want to know how the story ended. Any guesses? Well, here's the halacha. that the Bezdin of America paskined. Although plaintiff did in the end work for a final year, both sides agree that plaintiff did in fact resign from the yeshiva. Right? Plaintiff was rehired after some negotiations, but plaintiff thus waived the right to severance pay by resigning. Remember we said that resigning is a no-no? So I guess he lost because of that. Although he was rehired, it was through a new contract dated after school began and with a different job description and a new supervisor. So he's in trouble. So in the bottom line is no severance was paid in this case, but I just want to read the last paragraph. It would be proper and consistent with the spirit of the Sefer HaChinuch set out above for the defendant yeshiva to give plaintiff $1,000 as a gift to thank plaintiff for many years of service to the school. Okay, maybe $1,000 meant something in 2002, but probably not a lot today. Anyways, why am I reading this? Because I think it's a very, very interesting and application, something that we see in the Torah, and I'm like, okay, it's by an Eved Ivri, right? No, the fact that the Rishonim go out of their way and extend this to something that is practical in the 21st century, I think is very exciting. Okay, so that is almost the end. I want to end off this particular subject by reading the Sfas Emes. Okay, the Sfas Emes actually takes this concept to a hashkafic level. Right, these are one of those Sfas Emes is that you got to look at 2 or 3 times to really appreciate it, because this is really a refrigerator Sfas Emes. The pasuk Hanek Tanik Lo, the Zacharta Kieved Haisa, Isa b'midrashim. Okay, ready for this? Uma Rishaim Shenimkuru B'gneva Sam, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Hanek Tanik. Right, this is similar to what the Chizkuni mentioned. It says, hold on a second. Who are we giving all of these goodies to? We're giving them to Rishaim. Now, they may not be real Rishaim, but they did bad things, right? Again, bad things and bad people, right? Do the two go hand in hand? We're not going to talk about that. But at least the Medrash calls them a Rasha because they stole. And nevertheless, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hanik Tanik. You see where this is going? Tzadikim she'osin ritzono shel makom halachas kama v'kama she'yifra lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu sachar tov. Certainly, they're going to get some kind of hanaka, these tzadikim. Okay, this is a very predictable. It's a very predictable ending. Kizos mishpat haTorah kasher mashlim avodaso tzrichin lahaniko. The mishpat of the Torah is when we finish our avoda, in the slave's case, for example, you have to give him presents, right? Umikol sheken kishamashlim ha'adam shlichaso ba'olam haze yesh lo hanaka. So now we're going a little bit, right, in the celestial spheres, where we're saying, yeah, and when we finish after Me'ah V'Esrim, our job, right, there's also Hanaka. The Yesh Plugta, it's not over. And there's a machlokas that we read a half hour ago. Chadamar im nisbarach havayis biglalo manikin lova chadamar afilu lo nisbarach. Even if you didn't, if you weren't successful, you still have to give him. Remember that discussion we had on Yud Amud Beis in the second line? Umistama says as Sfas Emes hem beis minei ha'anaka. There are 2 types of ha'anakas: lemisha nisbarach or lemisha lo nisbarach. Afa pikein kol adam usa shlichus habori yisbarach shmo ba'olam. Whether or not the house benefited or whether there was success, either way, we did our shlichus, right? The shlichus is done. There's a good kind and there's a less than a good kind. But v'hagam ki hayegia b'olam hazeh hashafel ba'al yidei chet harishon shemakom adam harishon hayeh began Eden. But all the toil that we deal with in this world is all because of one reason, says as Sfas Emes. Don't forget, we all wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and work 10 hours a day and come home late and sweat in June, July, and August and freeze in December, January, and February. because of Adam Harishon. We never ever were intended to work. Right? We were not supposed to work. We're only working because of Adam Harishon. Okay? That's where our Yegiya was. Umikol makom, hare afilu mishenimkar bigneva so yesh lo hanaka. And we even get reward for someone who sinned, but yet he's still working, right? The fact that we're being Yegiya, even though it's not the best kind of Yegiya, because we're toiling, because we had no choice, because we couldn't pay back after stealing from someone, nevertheless, we are still offered Hanukkah for that. And then he ends off by saying, V'hinei Shabbos hu me'ein olam haba. When it comes to Shabbos, it's like olam haba, right? We say that a lot of times. We say it in Zmiras, we say it in davening. V'lachen yesh bo b'chinas ha'anaka l'bnei Yisrael, v'hu b'chinas ha'neshama ha'yisera, l'kol echad k'fi avodaso b'mei ha'maisa, right? It's a reward. It's a reward that we have a neshama yisera on Shabbos to take advantage of all the work that we did during the week, right? Remember we talked about Rachel Eliza, all those sources that I showed you about how we extol the virtues of work. Here's another example, add it to the list. The fact that we work all week and we have this reward on Shabbos, right? For right, as almost like a profit, right? That this neshama yisera is a Hanukkah for all of the work that we do during the week. That's how he describes it. B'nei Yisrael achar ha'avoda b'Mitzrayim l'kabala haTorah shehi gam ken Hanukkah kamo ken b'chol galus hagam sheba al yidei hachatoi mikol makom din Hanukkah lahem. No matter how bad it is, right? After all our work in Mitzrayim, what do? We got the Torah. That's also Hanukkah, right? So to every galus that we go through with our chatoim, we all will get Hanukkah b'mheira b'yameinu. I really love that Sfas Emes. Okay, I want to switch topics. We have 15 minutes left. There's a short piece of Gemara that always stood out in my mind. It's on Daf Chaf. The Gemara is talking about, on Daf Chaf, about right around in the middle of the page. The Gemara has this concept of we always give the Eved the advantage when it comes to like buying out, right? Geron Kesef, right? Remember the discussion that the Eved has the option, if he somehow gets a hold of money, he could redeem himself by paying the value of how many years are left, right? So if he stole 600 and his value is 600, then he works 100 a year. So if he, after 4 years, he could pay 200 to the Adon. So the Gemara goes back and forth. What if his value changed? He was worth more when he started, or he was worth less than he started. So we always give him the advantage that he's got to pay only the lesser amount. The Gemara goes back and forth and says, why are we so lenient on the Eved? Shouldn't we be stringent? So the Gemara says about 15 lines or so in the wide lines, Le'inyan pidyo nachmir alehem Reb Yossi bar Chanina. Right? Maybe when it comes, and the Gemara also talks about how we're lenient, right? If we have only one pillow, we give it to the Eved. If we have wine and one wine is better, we give the Eved the better wine. And it sounds like anything but slavery, right? As we mentioned many times, this whole concept that people think that we're racist and slaves, they don't know anything about us because they never read the halacha books. But right, all these examples about how we actually favor the Eved. But when it comes to redemption, he should pay the higher amount because of this brisa. All right, that's the whole introduction to this brisa that I want to talk about. A very, very beautiful brisa that says the following. The Tanya. The brisa says, Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina Omer Bo Re'eh Kama Kasha Avka Shel Shvius. Right? Look at how horrible doing work on Shemitah with Shemitah fruit is, right? It's an Avera, right? Obviously, you can't work the land on Shemitah. but you can't even make money by selling the produce. Okay? So the Gemara goes through a whole long brisa. Adam knows of not in Paris if you violate this prohibition, the sof mocher has been taltalov, you end up selling, right? It's like a punishment. Like when you make money illegally, right? Then you're gonna lose it because it never was yours to begin with. So this was never yours. And there's a very interesting a Cheshek Shlomo on this Gemara that says that the reason why we punish you, let's actually say that for the end. L'sof mocher es metaltalov shenemar b'shnas hayobel tashuvu ish alachuzato v'samach leikin timkaru memkar la misecha o kono miyad misecha davar niknim yad liyad lo hirgishba, right? You end up selling your property. I'm sorry, you end up selling your metaltalin. Then you end up selling your fields. It says kiyamu chachicha. Then before you know it, you end up selling your house, right? Because the pasuk says kiyim kar bayis moshav irchoma. Okay, skip a couple lines. The Gemara says, Lovatal yadu at shemocher is bito. Wow. You sell your movable items. You sell your house. You sell your real estate. You sell your farm. You sell your homestead, right? Your primary residence. You're homeless. And just when you thought that life was over, you end up selling your daughter because you need money. And you sell her as a shifcha shenamar v'chiyim kar ishes bito liyama. Now, this pasuk v'chiyim kar ishes bito liyama is not in Parshas Bahar; it's in Parshas Mishpatim. So the Gemara notes that and says v'alfagav debito lo ksiv b'hayanyan. Now, hold on a second. The Torah in Bahar doesn't talk about selling your daughter. It says that in Parshas Mishpatim. But if you're already at the stage where you've sold everything, then you would have already sold your daughter. Because the Kamash Malan is Nizban Inish Barte, Lo Nezef Baribta. Because the next pasuk says that you're so desperate, you're about to take out a very, very high interest loan. Now, but you didn't get to that point yet, but you sold your daughter already from Parshas Mishpatim. And the Gemara learns from there a very, very interesting concept that a person, if he had to choose, he's desperate for money, right? He would rather sell his daughter as a shifcha, as a servant, than borrow money with interest. A very, very powerful line, right? One of the most powerful lines I've heard is this concept of compounding interest on a loan. Why is it worse than selling, right? Why is it worse to borrow money at high interest than to sell your daughter? The Gemara says, my taima, parte migra v'nafka. Because there's a chance that even if you sell your daughter, now she'll eventually leave when she gets her simanim at age 12. But before that, when she's 7, when she's 8, when she's 9, if she somehow gets money from a Yerusha, from her long-lost great uncle, and it goes to her, she could actually redeem herself out of the servitude. So there's hope, as opposed where there is no hope to a high, right, to a very, very high interest loan. And by the loan, musfa va'azla. It keeps on going. Compounding interest is horrible, right? Just check out those APRs today.
Compound interest could also be to our benefit.
Yeah,
if we have money.
But we're talking about over here someone borrowing, not someone lending. Lobato liyado ad shalava baridis. And the final straw that breaks the camel's back is he's so desperate, he already sold his daughter, he's going to end up borrowing ribis. And then, unfortunately, he sells himself. And then, not only does he sell himself, he sells himself to a goy. And the final nail in the coffin is he sells himself to an avodah zarah. And all of this started, right? You know the poem, for the want of a nail, the kingdom was lost, right? For all you English majors out there, right? This is a very similar situation. You do one thing, and you have a whole avalanche. And how did the whole thing start? Remember how we started this? We started it with doing work with Shemitah fruit. So there's a beautiful Cheshek Shlomo, who says, you know what the connection is? What is Shemitah all about? We're going to punish you, Mida Keneged Mida. You violated Shemitah. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Tes says that the concept of Shemitah is LaHashem Haaretz Umlo. You have to know that just because you own real estate and fields and you're a big macher, you think it's yours? God says, I have news for you. You're a tenant. I'm the landlord, and you're the tenant. And you know what? To prove it, every 7 years, you're going to take a hike, right? It's almost like a lease, right? To prove that you don't own it, right? To prove that you're a leaser and you're not the owner, you have to renew your lease every few years. And if you don't, someone else could move into the property. So God says, you think you own it? I have news for you. And you know what we're going to do over here? Because you abuse the Shemitah, right? I am going to take away things that you think belong to you. I'm going to take away your metaltalin. I'm going to take away your house. I'm going to take away your daughter. And you know what the nail in the coffin is? I'm going to take away the closest thing to you. Says the Cheshek Shlomo, what's the closest thing to a person? Himself. He loses himself to an avodah zarah. That is the Mida Keneged Mida. And if you've never heard a Cheshek Shlomo like that in your life, it's about time. Now, that's not really the point why I brought down this Gemara, because I saw a Sforno. It's such an unbelievable Sforno that I wish I could read the whole thing to you in Hebrew. I just want to read a little bit of it, some in Hebrew, some in English, in the time we have remaining, because after I read this Gemara, so there's a couple, there's always messages behind the Gemara. Even Gemaras that are very simple, you have to think about, like, okay, what's the message to me? Or whether they're very complicated, like, okay, what's the purpose of breaking my head about this Gemara? So to me, I always took the message about compounding interest, right? It wasn't so much about Shemitah because, okay, today we can't be punished for doing work with Shemitah because there's really no Shemitah, there's Heter Mechira, and right. So that moral of the story we don't get. So the first part we can't really relate to because we're not even in Israel. So selling Shemitah fruit to us is not really such a Yetzer Hara. Let's all be honest. And the second possible moral of the story is, obviously not, not applying for, 24.99% APR credit cards, which is horrible because it's credit card debt that you can never get out of, just like all the commercials say. And the fact that the Gemara says it's so bad you would rather sell your daughter shows how harrowing and just dreadful this concept of compounding interest is. So that's another possible moral of the story. But in the last 10 minutes, I want to read this Sforno. The Sforno is actually not in Parshas Re'eh. It happens to be in Parshas Mitzorah. Okay, why is it in Parshas Mitzorah? Because we're talking about tzara'as of your begadim. The Sforno starts off by saying that generally when it comes to tzara'as, right, I'll read in English, while it's quite clear that this is not the kind of stain familiar to science. Now keep in mind, the Sforno, Rav Ovadia ben Sforno, lived from 1475 to like 1550 in Italy. Okay, and one of the great things about this Sforno was he wasn't just a Torah commentator, he was a philosopher and a mathematician and a scientist, like everybody back then was like a master of everything. So he's saying, listen, I think I understand this concept of tsaras, but based on my level of science, we all know that this is not something that really makes sense. This is not a stain familiar to science, and we can't put it in the laundry with detergent and clean it. He says discoloration of a garment in colors other than the ones that are work related due to the vocation of the wearer are usually caused deliberately by the owner. What occurred here is due to some sin the owner was guilty of. Now, we know this about tsaras, right? Tsaras is what we call a siman. God is showing us that there's something wrong and it's time to go to the Kohen and fix our ways. Then he says, at any rate, our tradition has taught that the only discoloration of garments or clothes that are considered from a halachic point of view are garments which themselves are white and not colored. A very interesting thing also, meaning if I have a shirt that's blue, it can't get tsaras on the begadim. It's only if it's white. Why? Because we can't see it, right? Any colored garment is not subject to tsaras, right? At all. It's not within the parameters of negat tsaras. The phenomenon of white garments or exterior walls of homes, so now he's making the next leap, which is what we know as nigebatim, right? Which are, right, these walls are usually whitewashed, and if you get tsaras, it breaks out into different colors. So that's also a warning to the owner to examine the person's life and to see where he went wrong. Here's where it applies to us. He brings down our Gemara in Kiddushin. He tells us about the violation of a rule which is only peripheral to the Shemitah legislation, which is doing work or making money from Shemitah fruit. Okay? It's called Avka Shel Shvius. The Talmud explains that violating the peripheral aspects of that legislation may result in the guilty party becoming impoverished. Remember how we said Avera Gereret Avera, right? You go down the line and it gets worse and worse until he has to sell himself, right? The process is gradual. Here's the punchline. So that the guilty party has ample opportunity to ask himself why God has singled him out for this kind of punishment. In Hebrew, the words he uses, I wish I had another half hour, but he says, the kol zeh bechemlas Hashem al amo. He says, you're not going to believe it. God is doing us a favor. The fact that yes, you sinned. Granted, you sinned. It may not be the worst sin in the world of making money by selling apples. Granted, you could do a hell of a worse, right, than that. But when you see these signs coming, he calls it Bechemlas Hashem alamo. God is having compassion for us. Why is he having compassion? Because God is giving us the opportunity to see that something is going on in our life, right? A lot of people say that, God is not going to appear to you, right? He can't come and show you. But a lot of people believe that one manifestation of God today is bringing us into situations of seeing certain things. And then we say to ourselves, I just saw something really, really weird. Why do you think God put me in this position? Why am I on this train at this station at this time to meet this person who's going to do this for me? And you connect all the dots. You say to yourself, why did God put me in this position? The same is true, he's saying, when it comes to bad things. When he's giving you the opportunity to say, oh, you know what? I just lost all my money. I just lost this. I had to sell this. I had to sell this. I see a moral degradation or a financial collapse. So these are what we call simanim of, okay, how do I deal with it now? So he brings down the Gemara and he says the same is true with negat tsaras. He says proof of the fact that this affliction is due to a well-meaning creator, one who was concerned with the welfare of his Jewish subjects, right? That's why we have negat tsaras on our garments, but we don't have it on the garments of non-Jews. Here's a law, and I'm sorry for going overtime, but I promise you this is well worth it. There is a law, and remember, this is all for a refuah shlema for our friend Yafa. Don't forget about that. So the Sforno was saying that if you know the halachas, we don't have nigei batim when it comes to non-Jews, and we don't have nigei begadim when it comes to non-Jews either. Why? Because Gentiles, as a rule, do not have life in the hereafter to look forward to. So therefore, God is not at such pains to warn them not to risk losing something that they don't look forward to in any event. When a Jew is in danger of losing his claim to eternal life, this is far more a serious matter. And God goes out of his way to afford the person potentially endangering his claim to eternal life, an opportunity to repent and change. Beautiful concept. He says at the end, once man, hold on a second. He says, once man becomes aware of God's concern for him, he will have little difficulty in making his own will correspond to the revealed will of his maker. He will begin to realize that by listening to the urgings of his body-dominated desires, he risks losing his eternal life. Okay, and he goes on and on and on. And toward the end, he says that's why God chose the Jewish people as a special people, because he has the hope that out of this nation will emerge a nucleus of people who are aware of their destiny. And he goes on, and just a little bit in Hebrew, because the punchline is, and the author over here in Sefaria says that he's actually giving a sermon to the people who are like, he calls spiritually comatose, people who like don't care about what's going on. They don't know what's going on. And the Sforno is trying to wake them up, just like the Gemara in Kiddushin is trying to wake up the people and say, hey, listen, do you see these simanim? Do you see what's going on? You should be lucky that you're having an opportunity. Right? Here it is in Hebrew. And if you still don't feel it, we're going to go from negaim on your clothing. The next step is you're going to get negaim on your house. This really doesn't happen, but we're showing you simanim. And it doesn't apply to non-Jews. He says, but remember how he said in the beginning of the word chemla, this is compassion that God is showing us. But hey, guys, I guess he was talking to the Italians in the 1500s. If you don't rise to the occasion, then you're not going to be zoche for this compassion, right? He says, ein zichron larishonim shenimtzu la'olam nigebatim. He says, it's never going to happen. What's never going to happen? Nigebatim will never happen. If you know the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Aleph, you know what one of the things that never happened was? Nigebatim. You know why Nigebatim never happened? Because it's a message to tell you, and I never understood this until I read this Sforno. What do you mean it didn't happen? It didn't happen because if we're on a level that we're not interested in perfecting our ways, then we're never going to be zoche to see something in our house that's a reminder to do tshuva. That's what it means, shelo hayu la'olam. There's a reason why it was never. Because if you're on a level that you don't want to repent, and you're in this, what he calls the spiritual coma, right? And you don't want to wake up from it, then you're not going to be zoche for a reminder, right? You're lucky to get a reminder to wake up and to do a certain chore in the morning, right? If you're not on that level, then you're not going to get reminded to. We need something to spur us on. And that's what Saras is all about. And the same is true with the connection in Kiddushin. All these simanim that are coming to this person, it's compassionate God telling us, hey, you got to change your ways. I thought that was an awesome Sforno. I've never seen this before, and this is a really, really great way to end the shir. So I hope you all enjoyed.
Thank you so much.